Step 4, made a searching and fearless moral inventory of ourselves. So step 4 is a preparation for the rest of the steps, which will restore us to sanity. And step 4, this is the second part of step 4. Step 4 is a longer step, and though you shouldn't let it take too long. One of the benefits of scheduling to do your 4th step when you don't have 4 days to do it, you should give yourself a limit. Whatever feels like a healthy limit and boundary to you so that you don't overdo it and focus on perfectionism. Just really go with the process of it.
Well, and the other interesting thing that you bring up a lot is that you keep going back to step 4. Like you'll say like, this happened and I took it to step 4. And so it's not a one and done, just like anything else. So it doesn't have to be perfect ever, because it's going to keep changing. Things are going to keep changing. You think you'll have one thing, down pat, and something else pops up. So,
and the other interesting thing that I found this weekend at the Step Study Workshop in Chicago was that you tend to see patterns in between. So once you start listing, for example, all of your items in the fear category, there starts to be a thread. And so while the source changes, there starts to be a thread. So you can keep going and going. And I mean, one woman shared this weekend, the first time she did her 4-step inventory, it took up 3 notebooks.
Wow.
3 notebooks. So, I mean, you can go there, and once you sort of do it the first time, you may find there aren't as many. And the main points of the 4-step exercise are twofold. The first one is to establish a list of flaws in our thinking. These are areas where in the past we got caught short so that we can address these squarely and effectively. So establish a list of flaws. Then the second point of the 4th step exercise is to define a new plan of action for how we'd like to respond in the future. So how will we act, not react? So looking at the thinking in the past, what didn't work and what does work. And we're looking at what's caused our emotional disturbance so that we can use a new frame of reference and define a sane response or resolution to life's inevitable challenges.
Yeah, that was such a big point to me the first time I was introduced to the 4th step, was that end piece of what are we going to do about it?
The resolution.
Yeah, thinking of a different solution, like very concrete, being able to take a step back and say, what can I do about this that could help me? Like, it was just so black and white once it was on paper, and it the whole process helps you reframe your thinking.
Absolutely.
And break it down in a way that we typically don't do, because we tend to spiral and get stuck in the insane thoughts.
And get stuck inside our own thoughts.
Yes.
One of the things that we talked about this weekend was getting outside of ourselves. And so it allows us to stop being so selfish and realize what our part was and realize what we're going to resolve to make and do better for other people.
Yeah.
And we were just sharing before we got on the phone that there are 8 main topics to explore. And while the basic emotions of happy, sad, scared are there, the 4th step breaks down 8 topics for exploration. So we were talking about the 8 topics of exploration in step 4. The 2 that I don't want to make an assumption. The 2 for me that took the longest and seemed to involve the most threads were resentment and fear. And then the other ones had pieces, but it was very interesting doing the inventory, looking at resentment and fear, that the other things such as self-pity, shame, guilt, confusion, frustration, and despair fell into line with those. And so as you go through the 4th step, and there are worksheets on the Eating Disorders Anonymous website to help you go through the 4th step, and you don't have to use them. You don't have to be perfectly filling in the boxes. Sometimes it's better just to free write it on a piece of scratch paper so you don't get stuck in that.
Yeah.
But you'll see that there's a description to go into a little bit in depth into what those things are and to fill that out. And so I know Shari had shared that it was helpful to have that specific breakdown of emotions.
Yeah, it was good to have the sample there just to kind of get the wheels turning. It was so new to even put a name to these emotions that I felt like I didn't think about on a regular basis. I didn't look at a situation and say, am I feeling resentful? You know, it wasn't something that was in my vocabulary necessarily, and it really opened up my eyes to make sure that I was identifying the emotion correctly, because you can't move past it. You can't come up with better solutions. You can't identify what's going on if you're not identifying that emotion. So I felt like the worksheets, if nothing else, they at least give you that framework and that vocabulary to then dive in as much as you need to.
Mm-hmm. Well, let's talk a little bit about each emotion.
Sure.
So the first one is resentment. People or institutions with which we have an old anger that was never fully resolved. This topic is the same in the AA text, and I want to jump in and just say that this 4-step varies, as to other things in EDA, from from AA, and that we don't have a specific sexual conduct inventory. It's found to be very much integrated with the other topics. So it comes up when you talk about shame and guilt and despair. So just to highlight that for members and people who are listening that may be members of both fellowships, that varies a little bit in the EDA text.
Yeah.
So resentment, people, institutions that we have old anger. So stuff that we've been holding on to for possibly ever, right? Fear, all the things that frightened or still frightened us. So that's a past and that's a future.
Yeah, and that's a tough one to put on paper. It's tough to like acknowledge these things, because a lot of time, at least for me, if I were gonna put something down, I don't want to write what I'm afraid of. Because like there's a part of me that I'm like, ooh, this is gonna happen. Like there's that underlying superstition piece that you're like, well, I don't even want to think about it. I don't want to go there. But there's value in going there. There's peace of mind that can come from going there. You know, just like acknowledging our eating disorders and the severity of it. You have to acknowledge it first. You have to put it in the spotlight first before you can do anything about it. And but yeah, that one's tough.
That one's tough, and that one in Appendix D actually takes up 2 pages. I mean, that one is huge. So after fear, we have self-pity, which are the reasons we felt in the past or currently feel sorry for ourselves. We have shame, and that, I want to speak a second to shame and embarrassment and guilt. So embarrassment would be, which happened to me, someone lifting your dress up in the middle of a dinner party while you're being introduced. No. That's embarrassed. It's yes, and Shari's sitting here bluffing. That's that thing that makes you get rosy in the cheeks. You know what I mean? Yeah, that's embarrassed. Now, guilt is like a little white lie. It's like that thing that irks at you. Shame is a deep at the core. Like shame involves things which we felt or feel responsible, but we're not responsible for them. So shame is someone's done something to you that leaves you feeling shameful. Like if you've been sexually abused, that shame comes from something that someone's done to you. Shame comes from, we talked a lot about this weekend, shame comes from maybe the gender that you are. Shame comes from maybe the culture that you come from, the skin color that you have, the hair color that you have, like things you can't necessarily change is your shame. It's like things that you've been, it's things, just that have happened, can't control.
Yeah, and that's an important distinction. It's not something you've done. But yeah, and then I think that's hard to address.
It is.
Too.
Well, and it may be a mental blank spot where you're not picking up on it.
Yeah.
Then the guilt would be where we had done wrong. Like if we were low on electrolytes and we got in a car accident, you know, something like that happens, that would be the guilt. Confusion, which confusion and fear, sometimes I can get those connected to, which is fine. And fear not that if you get these emotions confused or you have another emotion, it's completely fine.
Right.
Not
right
perfect. It's just the activity of going through and looking at what's quote unquote expired on your shelves in your grocery store and not selling it, you know? So confusion, situations where we felt or still feel abandoned or bewildered. Frustration, things that make us angry, even if we have no resentment in connection to them. So that's where frustration and resentment vary. The frustration is that things that make us angry with no resentment.
Okay.
And then despair, reasons for hopelessness, past or present.
Okay.
And you know, I found that each time I've done the 4th step, that some ring truer to me than others. And so don't, again, feel like you have to evenly spend the amount of time writing or thinking on each one. It can vary a little bit.
Yeah. No, I think that's
So
good.
as you go into the inventory for each one of these 8 topics, you'll look at the source. So it's kind of like the 5 W's, the who, what, where, when, why, how. So the source is who or what caused the emotion. For example, who caused or what caused the fear? Now the reason or the cause why we feel the emotion. For example, why we're scared. What is at risk or what is affected? Which part of you is threatened or hurt? Your self-esteem, your safety, your family relationships. Like what part of you was damaged by that situation? And this is a tricky part, but what was our error and our part in this? Because we're not looking to place blame, but we're looking at where we erred. Like maybe if we were dishonest, maybe we weren't, we needed to be more authentic.
Yeah.
What role we played. And then the resolution is what we're willing to do about it, both now and the next time we feel this way. And I want to speak to the resolution just for a second. I was working with some EDA members over the weekend at the workshop, and they kept coming up on a blank spot with the resolution piece.
Okay.
And that's normal, that happens. What will be excellent is when you share your 4th step in the 5th step, like that's what the 5th step is sharing it. Sometimes reading it out loud and an outside ear objectively will help you come up with a resolution. But if you don't know what to do as a resolution, the best thing to do is to say, I turn my will over to God, which is that 3rd step. We've committed now in the 3rd step to turn our will over to God. And so if you don't know what the resolution is, you're willing to turn it over to God, and wait for it. So like I said, you don't have to have a specific resolution, but it's good to look and listen for it in between the lines. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, that's what I was going to say too, that you might not, as you're doing this, it might come to you a day, a week, a month later that something might become a little bit more clear. But so much of this is just going through the process, just doing the work, putting in the time, thinking about it, and trying to restructure how you've thought about it.
Yeah, and just to know, like you said in the beginning, you can always come back to the 4th step. I'll jump forward just a smidgen and say that the 10th step is actually a mini version of the 4th step. It asks us every day, either in the morning or at night, to spend 1 hour doing an inventory. And so it's a shorter version, but it really gives us a chance to check in. And it really is that way. Like you wouldn't sell expired food to someone if you were, forget the use of that term, but you wouldn't sell expired items to a client, whether it's batteries or food or whatever it is. So we need to take inventory of our internal shelves and see what's expired and what needs to be inventoried and released. Yeah. Released in the 5th step to a neutral party, and then potentially going back in the 9th step and looking at someone that we needed to make a living amends to if possible. But it gives it a chance to really tease it out and sift it out.
Yeah.
So on with your 4th step. And if I could say anything, don't spend too much time on it. Keep going. Arrange to work with your sponsor, your therapist, someone to share your 4th step with within 2 days of writing it.
Okay.
And make sure that you schedule a time within 2 days to share it, where you'll have an hour afterward, and we'll talk about this more in the 5th step, but you'll have an hour afterward to focus and reconnect to what was shared, as well as write gratitude.
I think that's great advice. All right.
So go on with your inventory.
See
Have
you
fun.
guys.
Bye.